Alright people, this is my buyer's guide regarding the Suzuki Intruder 1500, or as it is known elsewhere, the C90. Yeah, these manufacturers play about with the names and the branding and whatnot. Yeah, so this one is the Intruder 1500, and let's talk about the origins of this bike. Now, the predecessor of this model was the 1400 Intruder, which was more of a chopper-esque styled bike. It was very popular, of course, and it is fairly one of a kind, and they kept making it as the S83 in the US for quite some time. So this is the big brother of it. The engine is nearly identical. It is very similar, at least. They changed a few things. Namely the bore and the stroke. So the 1400 has become a 1500, and they also changed the cooling system, because on the 1400 you have a slightly smaller oil cooler, which you can see right there. So the 1400 had a slightly smaller oil cooler, and that only cooled, or that only injected cooling oil into the rear cylinder head, not the front, because the front had more airflow. Regardless, the 1500 cools both heads, or I should say the oil cooler cools the oil that goes through the filter, and it directs oil into both heads for cooling. So apart from the increased displacement, they also changed the gearing of the transmission. These bikes have a very long gears, like in fifth, which is the top gear. If you do 60 miles an hour or 100 kilometers an hour, the engine barely turns over 2,300 or 2,400 RPMs. Most bikes with this sort of displacement turn about 500 to 800 revs more at the very same speeds. In that regard, it is akin to the sixth gear on the Harley Touring models. Now, because of this long transmission, or these toe gearing things, because of the toe gears, this bike has a tendency to chatter the driveline, because it is easy to lug the engine. Try to avoid that, because that can cause problems. Okay. Now, these bikes don't like lugging. That's the bottom line. Now, as far as the models are concerned, they came out in '97 in Japan, and because it was a success, they thought they are going to turn this into a global model. So in '98 they released this in Europe and in the United States and the other parts of the world. And basically that's the bike you see before you, with a little bit of a difference, because it's a 99 that this one is. Now, with these bikes, the 98 models did not have a fuel gauge. As you can see, this one has these E and F, and there are digital bars. Let me get the key. So the 98 model did not have a fuel gauge. These ones do have a fuel gauge. As you can see, you have those digital LCD bar jobbies on the dash. The 98 model did not have that. It had two odometers instead. This one just, one odometer and two trip meters. This one only has an odometer and one trip meter. So yeah, that's the difference. And because of that, the dashes are not entirely compatible, and they are not, as far as this is concerned, there is another difference between the 98 or the first year and the rest of the production. The ignition controller is not interchangeable, because the ignition controller on 98 models has a different output for the fuel pump than these ones. So there is a difference. Let's just put it that way. Now, these early bikes up to 2004 were carburetted, and the carbs are quite finicky. Now, these are downdraft carbs, which means the needles are almost horizontal, and as the slide goes up and down, they have a tendency to wear the needle jet, they go in and out of during operation. Now with normal OEM needles and with proper care, it is a very long thing, a very long process, so it does not wear as much. But as soon as you try and start using, let's say, dyno jet kits or other kits which have steel needles or titanium needles, that is going to chew up the factory needle jet rather quickly, that your fuel consumption goes down drastically. If these carbs are in good shape, they should deliver 45 to 40 miles to the gallon in the US, or in European terms 5.5 to 6 liters tops per 100 kilometers. So yeah, that's one of the signs: too much fuel consumption or high fuel consumption. Now the tank is under the seat. The tank that you see in front of you is not a tank. It houses the air cleaner and a few electrical bits. Basically that's just an empty shell with stuff tied to the frame under it, namely the starter relay and the main fuse, the ignition controller, the fuel pump, and on the other side you have the air pressure sensor for the ignition, and you also have a vapor trap canister which catches the fuel vapors from the tank that's under the seat. To fill the bike up with fuel, you have this door, you can open it and you have a car-like gas cap, and the fuel pours down into the tank that's under the seat. Now these early carbureted models, they were made till 2004, but in 2002 there was an upgrade, and that yielded a dual disc brake system. As you can see, this one only has just one disc on the front and it has one disc on the back. Now the calipers on these are basically legacy parts. They are off the 1400 Intruder, the front and the rear also. So the stopping power with these ones, it's not great, but you can upgrade the system with steel braided brake lines and sintered pads on both discs. But yeah, the 2002 on models are much better in that regard, so they have a better brake system. The other thing that went away in 2004 or after 2004 is the shroud, this Harley Fat Boy like shroud that went away, because as of 2005 these bikes came with just a normal shrouded forks and there was no cover behind the headlamp bucket. The 2005 to 2011 models, they were fuel injected, essentially the same air-cooled engine, 45-degree V-twin, but with fuel injection. Almost identical to this, although the covers and whatnot, like the tank covers or the fake tank covers, they don't fit. The bolt holes are in a different place, they are slightly differently shaped, but yeah, they are not interchangeable, but the engines are identical. Now the other thing that changed with the EFI introduction was the size of the tank. Early models like the 98 to 2004 had a 15 liter or 4 US gallon capacity under the seat. The fuel injected models have less fuel capacity because they used nearly the same tank, but the fuel pump and the base plate and everything else that hangs into the cavity of the tank takes more room, so the fuel capacity is 2 liters or half a US gallon less than with the carbureted models. The fuel range with the carbureted models, if the carbs are healthy, it should be around 120 to 130 miles until the yellow light comes on or the low fuel warning comes on. It's pretty much the same thing with the fuel injected models, because they have slightly better fuel economy due to the EFI system. Now the 2002 on models have dual disc brakes, like I mentioned. They have different calipers, and no, you cannot, and unfortunately cannot put one of those calipers to replace these ones. You have to live with these or replace the whole fork assembly, including the triple trees, because the attachment of the fork leg or the fork stanchion is also different. So yeah, the carburetor is one of those things that you should know about, and you can differentiate between the fuel injected and carburetor models. If you look at the right side of the engine, if you see that triangular thingy on the side, that is a carbureted model. On the fuel injected versions or the new devices, the newer models, you have a football or rugby ball shaped air cleaner cover. Well, these are not air cleaners because the air filter or the air box is actually up here. It's a huge 6-liter air box. These are just fake air cleaners essentially. Normally on European models you have this as a storage. You can turn that thing with a coin, you can pop the lid open and you have a big pocket in there, and as you can see that's quite hefty, so you can store a lot of things in that little triangular thingy. In the US models you have an EPA mandated secondary air system, and you also will be able to see pipes coming out of the bottom and going to the bases of the cylinder. That's the secondary air system. You can block it off and you can remove that valve should you want to. I'm going to put a link in the description to a forum where you can find all sorts of modifications and tips and how-tos and people with a lot of experience. Now, what else to say? Yeah, this one has the clutch right here behind that cover, and next to that cover you have another cover which basically houses the oil filler cap, because as you can see there's no exposed oil filler cap. It is hiding behind that lid. And you can check the oil level by looking at that window. Well, this one obviously is on a gradient now, it's on a side stand, so you won't be able to see the oil, and it is a difficult thing to do. You need to ask someone to keep the bike upright until you look, or you have to use a mirror with a telescopic handle to check the oil level, or use a stand or something along those lines. Now, this one is a monoshock bike. As you can see, there are no springs on the side or no rear shocks. There's one hidden one in there, and it has a linkage system with 3 sets of bearings, and most people have a tendency to forget about that. They need to be greased and cleaned and whatnot, but usually they don't mess about with that, so they rot over time. That's something to attend. That's something to keep in mind, and you should attend to it. The other thing is the shaft drive. Most people think, oh, shaft drive lives forever, you don't need to do anything about it, or you don't need to mess with it, you just change the oil. Nope. Every now and then you have to re-grease the splines on the shaft, because otherwise they will turn to rust. Eventually water gets in there, the grease dries up, whatever, and yeah, that just kills your final drive. So that's something else to consider. Another problem with these bikes is a potential problem is the weak charging system. The charging system as such is not weak, but it is wired in a stupid way. Basically you have this big bulbous cover, and its contents, well, it's about 80% of air, and there's a little scoop here where air can enter, and the voltage regulator is bolted to the inside of that cover. Now, the path between that voltage regulator and the main fuse is quite long, the wire is fairly thin, and there's only one wire going to the main fuse holder. So there's a lot of voltage loss on that path, and like I said, the wire is thin, and there's a 4-pin connector there. Suzuki only used, well, they used 2 pins for the starter activation, and the other 2 pins should be the regulated voltage input for the battery, or the battery power supplying the harness through those 2 pins. But Suzuki only used 1 with a thin wire, and there's a lot of voltage loss, or voltage sag across that connector. Keep that in mind. That can be upgraded and that can be fixed, and the problem goes away. Like I said, there are more details about that on that forum I mentioned. The battery, as you can see, it sits right in front of the engine, right there. The tank is down under the seat, or the center of mass is very low on this bike, so in that regard it is a very comfy one. Another potential upgrade for these bikes, because as you can imagine they vibrate some, foam or soft grips, bar end weights, and Harley Davidson foot peg rubbers, the dampened ones with the little hollow rubber johnnies. They fit, it's the same shape, you just have to drill a few holes on the OEM Suzuki floorboard to make them fit. So yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention, because it's peculiar and particular to this bike or to this engine, is the clutch. The clutch, which is there, is a slipper system. So it's not like an ordinary motorcycle clutch, it also has a slipper system in it, which means when you're decelerating and let's say you downshift a bit too much, instead of the rear wheel locking up, the clutch is going to disengage slightly, the pressure on the clutch springs will decrease and the clutch plates can slide or slip, so you don't lock up the rear wheel and don't lose control. Now that also has a downside in the other direction when you're trying to give it, let's say when you try to slip the clutch. You're coming out of an intersection, you did not click it back to second and you're still in third and you can hear the engine lugging. If you try and rev the engine up and slip the clutch, that's not going to end well, because the slip system in the other way can lock up suddenly because there's too much torque coming from the engine. I have a separate video on that topic. When you try to take off from a red light, revving the engine up and slowly letting the clutch out, it will just lurch you forward as soon as the slipper clutch system engages, and it locks up the plates and it just jerks you forward. That's the nature of the beast. It takes a little bit of getting used to. Don't rev the bike up. This is not that sort of thing. Otherwise, these are very resilient engines. They can do tremendous amount of miles or kilometers, whichever metric you believe in or whichever you use, but yeah, they are very, very resilient, and it's a bike for life technically, obviously if you look after it. Of course you have to live with the Suzuki fit and finish problems. The chrome, as far as the quality is concerned, it's not great. I had to replace my handlebar because it was bubbling up. I'm in the chrome. I have the same issue here and I have the same issue there, and some of the covers have the same problem. So yeah, it's Suzuki's fit and finish. If you want to live with it for a long time, try and use some chrome polish with a wax. It can protect the chrome much better and keep it nice and shiny for a long time. So yeah, these are the peculiarities of the 1500 Intruder. Like I said, it is a big and heavy bike. It is very calm, around 75-80 miles per hour. So, and the suspension is fairly good. The rear is nice and plush. The front, in my opinion, is a bit too harsh, but that can be remedied with a different oil or a different set of springs to make it a bit more comfortable. Or if you like riding aggressively, then you can tune the rear. Well, you can change all sorts of things. A lot of stuff is still available for these bikes. So yeah, the fuel injected models lasted till 2011, and there was the latest version of it, the C90 Boss or Tourer or whatever they call it, that came out in 2012 or 2013. Now that is a completely different engine that is also liquid cooled, and the cylinder angle is not 45, it's 54 degrees. It has a different transmission, different clutch, different altogether. It's a more high-strung machine. It's basically, how shall I put it, a dumbed down version of the M109 engine, perhaps. So yeah, it is. It has more horsepower. It has a little bit more torque. It's a more modern engine with more modern things in it. But these old bikes, with its old school heavy flywheels or heavy cranks and long stroke pistons and whatnot, they are really resilient, and they can last a very long time. Now obviously they vibrate some, they are heavy, and they can be cumbersome, but you can change the tires, like the 150 up front and the 180 on the back can be swapped for a 130 and a 170, and it will be much more nimble, shall we say, around tight bends, and it will be more maneuverable in town. However, with these big tires on straight roads or highways or motorways, it is a pleasure to ride, and it's very comfortable. As you can see, the seat height is very low, and the seat, both for the passenger and for the rider, they are very wide and very comfortable. So yeah, easy to maintain, not too difficult to fix. There are all sorts of tried and tested methods to work out the teething problems. Like I said, there's a link in the description for the forum. But like I said, you have to put up with the weight, the interesting nature of the clutch, the charging problems that you can experience, and of course the carburetor issues in case you choose a carbureted one. So yeah, that would be it. Don't subscribe. Take care. Cheers.